At dawn on November 14, 1887, Hannah Cole walked into Red Hollow beside a horse everyone knew did not belong to her. The bay mare carried Daniel Mercer's Black Pine brand on her left flank. She was the finest animal on his ranch, a long-legged Morgan named Juniper, who could cover 8 miles of rough country without losing her breath. Hannah, by comparison, looked as though the night had nearly finished her. Damp auburn hair clung to her cheeks, flour whitened the hem of her gray wool skirt, and a strip of rawhide bound one wrist to Sheriff Elias Grant's saddle horn. People began appearing before the sheriff reached the jail. A blacksmith stepped out with his apron still tied around his waist. 2 women watched from the hotel balcony. The mercantile owner stood in his doorway holding an unlit lantern, delighted to discover that scandal had opened earlier than his store. "That's Mercer's mare," someone said. "Caught her 3 miles east of town," Sheriff Grant announced. "Bringing the animal back before sunrise doesn't make it borrowing." Hannah raised her chin. She was 27, thin from a season of poor meals, and plainly dressed enough to be overlooked under ordinary circumstances. Nothing about that morning was ordinary. "Did you take the mare from the hitching rail outside Finch's store?" the sheriff asked. "Yes." The answer moved through the gathering like wind through dead grass. "Did Mr. Mercer give you permission?" "No." "Where did you ride?" Hannah said nothing. Sheriff Grant glanced at the flour on her boots. "You went east. There's nothing east except the abandoned Vale Mill." Her expression did not alter, but Daniel Mercer saw her fingers close around the torn edge of her coat. Daniel stood near the back of the crowd, broad-shouldered and still, his brown hat shading a face that rarely offered the town more than it required. He had ridden into Red Hollow the previous evening for horseshoe nails and discovered Juniper missing before midnight. He had been angry then. Now he was watching Hannah instead of the mare. By 8 o'clock, Justice Warren Hale had been summoned to the narrow hearing room above the assay office. Hannah stood before his desk while Sheriff Grant repeated the facts. Daniel remained near the door. "You have confessed to taking the horse," Hale said. "If you explain where you went and why, the court may consider the circumstances. If you refuse, you could spend 5 years in the territorial prison." Colorado had not been a territory for 11 years, but Judge Hale still called the prison territorial when he wished it to sound especially cold. Hannah looked directly at him. "I have nothing else to say." Sheriff Grant leaned one hand against the desk. "Who were you meeting at the mill?" No answer. "Was someone helping you?" Her silence was answer enough to every person in the room except Daniel. Juniper stood outside the window, tied beneath the awning. Her saddle blanket had shifted during the ride into town. Something small and blue was tangled beneath the leather strap. Daniel stepped outside without explanation. It was a child's mitten, knitted from blue wool and patched across the palm with careful gray stitches. Fine white flour dust clung to its cuff. He remembered the Vale Mill. It had closed after Owen Vale died in a wagon accident the previous spring. Owen's widow had followed him to the grave 3 weeks earlier, leaving behind one child, a quiet 8-year-old girl named Lucy. Sheriff Grant had told the town that Lucy had been sent to relatives in Denver. Daniel carried the mitten back upstairs. Hannah saw it in his hand, and for the first time that morning, fear broke through her composure. Sheriff Grant reached for it. Daniel closed his fist. "I'm withdrawing my complaint," he said. Grant frowned. "Horse theft is not settled by changing your mood." The mare was returned sound. "Nothing was taken from my saddlebags," she confessed. "And I'll stand her bond until the hearing." Justice Hale studied him. "That bond will be $500. Daniel owned land and cattle, but seldom $500 in the same room. He removed a folded bank draft from his coat. It had been meant as the winter wages for 6 ranch hands. He laid it on the desk. Hannah stared at him, as though he had committed an offense more confusing than hers. 20 minutes later, they stood alone behind the livery. The rawhide had been removed from her wrist, though its red impression remained. Daniel handed her the mitten. "How far is the mill?" he asked. "I don't know what you mean." "You have flour on your boots, and this was beneath my saddle. You should return to your ranch. You should have chosen a slower horse if you didn't want the owner involved." Despite everything, A brief spark of irritation entered her eyes. Daniel preferred it to fear. "Sheriff Grant must not find her," Hannah said at last. "Lucy Vale?" Hannah looked toward the street before answering. "If he takes her, Silas Rusk gets the mill property. Once that happens, no one will ever learn what happened to her father." Daniel knew Rusk. Everyone in Red Hollow did. He bought cattle cheaply, lent money dearly, and had recently shown great interest in every piece of land bordering Willow Creek, including Daniel's. "Can the girl ride?" Daniel asked. "She can barely stand. She has been hiding without a fire for 2 nights. Daniel untied Juniper and placed the reins in Hannah's hands. "You lead," he said. "I'll follow far enough behind that she won't see me." They reached the abandoned mill shortly before noon. Its broken wheel stood motionless above the frozen creek, and wind slipped through gaps in the weathered boards. Hannah entered alone. Several minutes passed before she emerged holding the hand of a small, pale girl. Lucy wore one blue mitten. Her other hand was bare. Then hoofbeats sounded from the western road. Sheriff Grant was coming, and he had brought 3 riders with him. The riders were less than half a mile away. Lucy stepped backward into the mill, her bare hand gripping Hannah's skirt. Hannah moved in front of her with the instinctive speed of someone accustomed to placing herself between danger and a child. Daniel counted 4 riders. Sheriff Grant led them. Deputy Calvin Orr rode beside him, followed by 2 men wearing the dark green coats of Silas Rusk's cattle company. "That is not a lawful search party," Hannah said. "No," Daniel replied. "It's a hunting party." He led them through the mill. Behind the broken grinding stones, a narrow grain chute descended toward Willow Creek. Years earlier, wagons had collected flour from the lower doors. Now the passage was half blocked by collapsed boards and drifts of old husks. Daniel kicked away the loose timber. "My gray gelding is behind the mill," he said. "Take the creek north for a mile. Stay in the water wherever it is shallow." Hannah stared at him. "And you?" "I'll give Grant something else to look at." Lucy began coughing. The sound was dry and weak. Daniel removed his heavy canvas coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. The garment reached almost to her ankles. "Why are you helping us?" Hannah asked. "I paid $500 to keep you out of jail. I'd prefer my investment survive until supper." It was not the full answer, but the absurdity of it steadied her. Daniel lifted Lucy onto his gray gelding, Ash. Hannah climbed behind her, gathered the child against her chest, and guided the horse into the frozen creek. Daniel watched until the cottonwoods hid them. Then he returned to the front of the mill and waited beside Juniper. Sheriff Grant reined in hard enough to scatter gravel. "Where is she?" Daniel checked Juniper's foreleg as though 4 armed riders were a minor interruption. "Hannah Cole? You know perfectly well who I mean." "She isn't here." Grant dismounted. "You expect me to believe she rode to an abandoned mill, left flour all over your saddle, and disappeared? I have never found belief to be your strongest talent." Deputy Orr concealed a smile by rubbing his mouth. Grant ordered the men to search. They entered the mill, opened cupboards, kicked apart empty barrels, and even thrust a rifle beneath the floorboards. One of Rusk's men found the lower door, but the creek offered only black water, stones, and several directions in which a horse might have gone. Grant returned with anger tightening his jaw. "If you are concealing that child, Mercer, you are interfering with a lawful guardianship." "Whose guardianship?" "Silas Rusk has petitioned the court." "Petitioned is not the same as received." "It will be by Friday." Daniel glanced at the 2 company riders. Then perhaps Rusk should allow the judge to decide before sending employees to collect her. Sheriff Grant stepped closer. "You have already risked your winter payroll for a horse thief. Don't risk your land for an orphan who has no claim on you." Daniel looked toward the creek. "That sounds like advice Rusk paid you to deliver." Grant's hand moved toward his belt. Daniel did not reach for his own revolver. He merely looked at the sheriff until Grant remembered that a badge did not make 4 men invincible. "We'll search your ranch next," Grant said. "Bring a warrant." Daniel waited until the riders disappeared down the western road before mounting Juniper. Night had fallen by the time he reached the old lambing cabin on the northern edge of Black Pine Ranch. Hannah had found it exactly as he had instructed. She sat on the floor beside Lucy, using straw and Daniel's coat to keep the girl away from the frozen boards. Lucy's lips were pale. "She needs warmth," Daniel said. "Your ranch will be watched. My house has stone walls, 3 doors, and Elena Ortiz." Grant is more frightened of Elena than he is of the district judge. Hannah almost smiled. Black Pine Ranch lay 7 miles north of Red Hollow, surrounded by pine-covered ridges and nearly 2,300 acres of winter pasture. Daniel brought them through the cattle gate after dark. His foreman, Ben Ortiz, asked no questions. Ben's wife Elena took one look at Lucy and began issuing orders in both English and Spanish. Within an hour, the child had been bathed, wrapped in blankets, and fed several spoonfuls of chicken broth. Hannah remained beside her until her breathing settled. Daniel waited in the kitchen. A lamp burned above the table, illuminating the bank draft's absence from his coat as plainly as any empty pocket could be illuminated. Hannah entered, carrying the blue mitten. "Lucy's mother was my friend," she said. "Emma Vale sent for me when Owen died. I arrived 3 days before she took sick. Grant said Lucy had relatives in Denver. She has none. The letter he showed the court was forged. Why does Rusk want the mill? The land includes both banks of Willow Creek for nearly a mile. Someone has been placing survey stakes along the eastern ridge." Daniel had found identical stakes on his own southern pasture 2 weeks earlier. "A railroad spur," he said, "or a reservoir. Either would make the Vale property worth 20 times what Rusk offered Emma." Lucy stirred in the adjoining room. Hannah immediately rose, but the child was only dreaming. Daniel pushed a cup of coffee toward her. "You and Lucy can stay here until Friday's hearing. You don't know me. I know you returned my mare, after stealing her. Juniper has forgiven you. She is usually the stricter judge." Hannah wrapped both hands around the warm cup, but did not drink. "If Grant discovers Lucy here, he may arrest you. He can try. I won't let you lose your ranch for us." Daniel's gaze rested on the blue mitten. "I once remained silent while this town condemned someone who needed me to speak. I won't make that mistake twice." He offered no further explanation, and Hannah did not press him. From the bedroom came Lucy's small, frightened voice. "Hannah?" Hannah hurried to her. Daniel remained in the doorway, while Lucy held up her bare hand. "Mama said I must never lose the blue mittens," the girl whispered. "She said they would keep our home safe." Hannah looked down at the mitten Daniel had found. Something small and hard was concealed beneath its patched gray palm. Elena brought her sewing basket to the bedroom and placed it beside the lamp. Hannah turned the blue mitten over in her hands, studying the gray patch sewn across its palm. "These stitches were added recently," she said. Lucy nodded from beneath the quilts. "Mama fixed it after Papa died. She told me not to pull at the patch." Daniel stood near the doorway, careful not to crowd the child. Hannah selected a small pair of scissors and cut the first thread. Her fingers trembled once, then steadied. Beneath the patch, Emma Vale had sewn a narrow pocket into the wool. Hannah pulled out a flat brass key no longer than her smallest finger. The number 12 had been stamped into its head. Daniel took one look at it. "I've seen that kind of key before." "Where?" "Owen installed an iron record box in the mill office after the flood of '84. I helped him carry it upstairs." "Could this open it?" "Unless he changed the lock." Lucy watched them with grave blue eyes. "Mama said Papa put the truth where flour never spoils." Hannah looked at Daniel. "The record box." "Possibly. We must return tonight." "No." The refusal was quiet, but it had the weight of a barred door. "Rusk's men searched the mill," Hannah said. "If they find that box—" "They already searched once, and left without it. Going back tonight would lead them directly to whatever they missed. You don't get to decide this for me." "No," Daniel replied. "I decide whether I ride with you. I won't do that in darkness while Lucy is sick and Grant has men watching the roads." Hannah had expected an order. Instead, he had drawn a boundary around his own actions and left hers untouched. It was considerably more difficult to argue with. She returned the key to its hidden pocket and placed the mitten beneath Lucy's pillow. They slept for what remained of the night. Lucy shared the upstairs guest room with Hannah. Daniel took the small room beside the kitchen, while Ben and Elena returned to their cottage beyond the bunkhouse. The arrangement was proper enough to satisfy everyone except Red Hollow, a town that could find impropriety in an empty church. By morning, light snow covered Black Pine Ranch. Lucy's fever had weakened, and Elena set her near the kitchen stove with warm milk and bread. Hannah found Daniel at the dining table, studying a stack of accounts. She paused beside him. "You paid this invoice?" Daniel glanced at the paper. 3 weeks ago. "It is wrong. Most bills feel wrong when a man pays them. The arithmetic is wrong." Hannah pointed to the figures. Rusk's Willow Creek Ditch Company had charged Daniel 40 cents per head for 312 cattle. The total should have been $124.80. The invoice demanded $187.20. Daniel checked the multiplication. "You saw that in one glance?" "I kept the Vale Mill books during harvest. Before that, I taught arithmetic at the schoolhouse." He handed her 2 older invoices. Within 10 minutes, she found another overcharge and a water maintenance fee that appeared twice under different names. "These are not mistakes," she said. "Someone expects ranchers to count cattle more carefully than dollars." Daniel leaned back in his chair. He had managed Black Pine alone for 9 years, and disliked discovering that another person could understand part of it better than he did. Fortunately, he disliked being cheated more. "I need a bookkeeper through winter," he said. Hannah folded her arms. "You need a convenient explanation for why an accused horse thief is living in your house." "I need both. I won't accept charity. $25 a month, room and meals. $5 from each month goes toward repaying your bond. At that rate, I will be indebted to you for 8 years. Then you should negotiate better." Her eyes narrowed. $30 a month. Nothing deducted for Lucy's food. "I repay the bond after the hearing, according to what I can earn." 28. 30. Daniel offered his hand. 30. Hannah shook it. Her palm was work-roughened, and her grip contained no hesitation. The agreement had barely been made when a buggy approached the house. Silas Rusk stepped down, wearing a black wool coat too fine for ranch work. Sheriff Grant followed him, carrying no warrant. Daniel met them on the porch. Rusk was a handsome man, in the polished manner of a silver-handled knife. "I came to prevent an unfortunate misunderstanding." "You brought the sheriff," Daniel said. "That usually improves misunderstandings." Rusk's smile remained fixed. "Miss Cole stole your horse and abducted a child. Surrender Lucy to my guardianship, and I may persuade Sheriff Grant to recommend mercy." Hannah stepped onto the porch behind Daniel. "You petitioned for guardianship before Emma Vale was buried," she said. "Someone had to consider the child's welfare. You considered the mill's water rights." For the first time, Rusk's smile thinned. Daniel noticed. Rusk removed a folded document from his coat. "By Friday, the court will place Lucy in my care. The Vale property will then be managed by a responsible citizen." "Meaning you," Daniel said. "Meaning someone who understands its value." Rusk looked beyond him toward the southern pastures. "The same is true of Black Pine. Your cattle note comes due in March, doesn't it? A difficult winter could make 2,300 acres rather burdensome." Daniel's expression did not change, but Hannah understood the threat. Rusk did not merely want the mill. His survey would cut across Black Pine Ranch as well. "Leave," Daniel said. Sheriff Grant placed one boot on the porch step. Daniel looked down at it. Grant removed the boot. Rusk returned to the buggy. "Friday, then." When they had gone, Hannah drew the brass key from the mitten and held it toward the pale morning light. "Rusk believes the record box still exists," she said. "Otherwise, he wouldn't need Lucy removed before the hearing." Daniel looked east toward the distant line of Willow Creek. They had 3 days to reach the box before Rusk did. They left Black Pine Ranch before sunrise the following morning. Elena remained with Lucy, while Ben watched the northern road. Daniel chose a narrow trail across the eastern ridge, where pine branches concealed them from anyone observing the main road. Hannah rode Juniper. Daniel had expected to explain how the mare handled ice. Instead, Hannah loosened the reins, shifted her weight, and allowed Juniper to choose her footing across the frozen slope. The animal moved beneath her, with complete trust. "My father kept a livery stable," Hannah explained. "I was cleaning stalls before I could read." "Why did you choose Juniper that night?" "She had strong legs, an intelligent face, and no habit of pulling against the bit." "You learned all that while she was tied outside the mercantile?" "It took nearly a minute." Daniel looked at her differently after that. Red Hollow saw a woman who had taken the most expensive horse available. Hannah had chosen the animal most likely to carry her safely to Lucy and return without injury. A thief would have ridden west toward the railroad. Hannah had ridden east toward danger. They reached Vale Mill shortly after 8. Fresh boot prints marked the snow, but the building appeared empty. Inside, the upper office had been stripped. Desk drawers lay broken on the floor, and Owen Vale's business papers had been scattered like autumn leaves. "The record box was against that wall," Daniel said. Only a pale rectangle remained in the dust. Hannah knelt beside it. 2 parallel grooves crossed the floorboards, but they ended beneath a large flower cabinet. "It wasn't carried through the door," she said. "It was moved behind this." Together they pushed the cabinet aside. A narrow wooden panel had been fitted into the wall. Flower dust concealed its edges, and someone had nailed an empty shelf over it. Daniel used the back of a hatchet to loosen the boards. Behind the panel stood the iron record box. Hannah removed the brass key from the mitten and inserted it into the lock. For one dreadful moment it would not turn. Then Daniel placed one hand against the box to steady it while she pushed harder. The lock opened. Inside lay the original Vale property deed, 3 tax receipts, a survey map, and a narrow account book tied with cord. Hannah examined the tax receipts first. "Rusk claimed Emma owed 3 years of property taxes," she said. "These prove everything was paid." Daniel unfolded the map across the floor. A proposed reservoir had been drawn over Willow Creek. The water line swallowed the Vale Mill, Daniel's southern pasture, and portions of 4 neighboring homesteads. Along the margin, someone had listed the price Rusk expected to pay for each parcel after foreclosure. Black Pine Ranch was valued at less than half its worth. "He means to make the land useless," Daniel said, "then buy it before announcing the reservoir." Hannah opened the account book. Several pages had been torn out, but the remaining entries recorded payments from Rusk's company to Sheriff Grant. Most were disguised as freight expenses. 3 were marked only with Grant's initials. Loose inside the cover was a note in Owen Vale's handwriting. "If anything happens to me, the figures in this book must be compared with the county disbursement ledger, pages 86 through 90. The duplicate weight slips are hidden behind the north wheel bearing. Deliver everything to Justice Hale. Trust no document carried by Elias Grant." Hannah read it twice. "This proves Owen suspected them," she said, "but without the county ledger and those weight slips, Rusk can call it an angry man's accusation." Daniel gathered the deed, receipts, and account book. "Then we find the rest." A board creaked downstairs. They both froze. Another sound followed, the scrape of a boot across the mill floor. Daniel extinguished their lantern. Hannah placed the documents inside her coat while he moved beside the office door. A man below muttered something they could not hear. Then came the unmistakable splash of liquid against dry timber. The sharp odor reached the upper floor a moment later. Kerosene. Daniel crossed to the window, but iron nails had been driven through its frame from the outside. The stairs offered the only ordinary exit. A match scratched below them. Hannah looked toward the hidden record box, then at the old flower chute built into the far wall. "How much do you trust me?" she whispered. Daniel heard the flame catch downstairs. "More than I did yesterday." "Then help me open that chute." The flower chute had been built to carry 50-pound sacks from the upper floor to the loading room below. It was steep, narrow, and coated with enough flower dust to choke anyone who entered it. It was also their only escape. Hannah forced the wooden gate upward, while Daniel pulled away a rusted chain. Smoke gathered against the ceiling. Flames climbed the staircase, feeding greedily on dry grain husks and spilled kerosene. "I'll go first," Daniel said. "You won't fit past the broken support halfway down." "You know that for certain?" "I crawled through this chute every summer, from the age of 16 until Owen finally bought a proper hoist. She gathered her skirts, sat at the opening, and lowered herself into the darkness. Daniel gave her the documents wrapped inside his leather vest. Hannah held them against her chest and slid downward. A splinter tore through her sleeve, but she continued until her boots struck the broken support. She turned sideways, squeezed beneath it, and dropped into the loading room. "Clear," she called. Daniel entered the chute as burning timber collapsed across the office floor. He reached the obstruction and discovered that Hannah's warning had been accurate by less than an inch. He exhaled, forced one shoulder beneath the beam, and pushed through. A nail tore across his upper arm before he dropped beside her. Fire had already reached the loading room. "This way." Hannah caught his uninjured hand. They ran toward the water wheel chamber, where ice covered the stones in a thin silver sheet. The north wheel bearing stood above the rushing creek. Daniel remembered Owen's note. "The weight slips. There isn't time. We won't get another chance." Hannah climbed onto the wheel frame while Daniel braced her feet. She reached behind the iron bearing and felt along the frozen timber. Her fingers closed around an oilskin packet. The roof groaned. Daniel pulled her down as a burning beam crashed across the wheel. Together they broke through the lower door and fell into the snow beside Willow Creek. Behind them, fire consumed the mill that Owen and Emma Vale had spent 15 years building. A rider watched from the ridge. Daniel saw the green Rusk Company coat and the white blaze on the horse's face before the man turned east. The horse's left hind leg struck the ground unevenly. "He's missing a shoe," Hannah said. "You noticed?" "I notice horses." The rider disappeared among the pines. Daniel and Hannah found Juniper and Ash tied where they had left them. By the time they reached Black Pine Ranch, smoke had blackened their clothing, and blood had soaked through Daniel's torn sleeve. Lucy ran from the house when she saw them. "You found it." Hannah knelt and showed her the original deed. "Your home still belongs to you." Lucy threw both arms around her neck. Elena cleaned Daniel's wound in the kitchen. The cut was long but shallow. Hannah held the bandage while Elena wrapped it, and Daniel remained remarkably calm for a man being treated by two women who agreed that his judgment was poor. When Lucy had gone to bed, Hannah opened the oilskin packet. Inside were 42 duplicate weight slips from Rusk's cattle yard. Each recorded the true weight of livestock purchased from local ranchers. The figures in Owen's account book were considerably lower. Rusk reported the smaller numbers to the sellers, Hannah said. He kept the difference. Several slips carried Sheriff Grant's initials as official witness. "With the county ledger, we can prove where the stolen money went," Daniel said. A soft scraping came from the end of the table. Lucy had left the blue mitten beside Daniel's chair. The gray patch had been cut open when Hannah removed the key. Daniel threaded a needle with dark blue cotton and began closing the seam. His stitches were uneven but sturdy. "My brother's name was Will," he said without looking up. 8 years ago, Grant accused him of cattle rustling. Hannah waited. "I could have testified that Will was working the northern pasture on the night the cattle disappeared, but I had found one of the missing brands in his coat. I didn't know Grant had planted it." "What happened?" "Will left before the trial. He died in a Wyoming blizzard that winter." Daniel tied off the thread. "I mistook silence for fairness. It was only fear wearing a respectable coat." Hannah touched the repaired patch with one finger. "You were not silent when Lucy needed you." "No, but I was nearly 8 years late." Before Hannah could answer, the back door opened. Ben entered, carrying a notice torn from a fence post in town. His expression told them the news before Daniel unfolded it. Sheriff Grant had issued warrants for both Daniel and Hannah. 2 witnesses claimed they had seen them enter Vale Mill shortly before the fire. Grant had charged Hannah with arson, and Daniel with helping her destroy evidence belonging to Lucy's estate. At the bottom, another order authorized Grant to search Black Pine Ranch and remove Lucy by force. "He'll come at sunrise," Ben said. Daniel looked toward the room where Lucy slept. Hannah placed the repaired blue mitten over the brass key. This time, running would only prove Rusk's story for him. No one slept after Ben brought the warrants. Hannah spent the remaining hours copying every figure from Owen's account book and the recovered weight slips. Daniel arranged the originals inside a canvas document case. "Ben will take these to Justice Hale before sunrise," he said. "If Grant searches the ranch, he won't find them here. He will arrest Ben if he sees him. He knows a stock trail through the northern ridge." Hannah sealed the case. "We could use the same trail." Daniel did not answer immediately. Running would keep them free for another day, but it would leave Lucy's future entirely in Rusk's hands. At Friday's hearing, he would describe Hannah as a fugitive who had stolen a horse, abducted a child, and burned the child's inheritance. "We stay," Hannah decided. Daniel studied her. "You don't owe this town a chance to punish you. I owe Lucy the chance to keep her name." She looked toward the bedroom. "When my parents died, a county guardian separated me from my younger sister. He promised Clara would be cared for until I found work. By the time I earned enough to bring her home, she had died of fever in a workhouse." Daniel said nothing. Silence from another man might have felt like indifference. His felt like a place in which she was allowed to finish. "I believed the law because I was frightened," Hannah continued. "I won't teach Lucy that disappearing is the only way to survive." "You were 17. I was her sister." "And you were 17, Daniel repeated. The words did not pardon her. They did something more difficult. They returned the blame to the adults who had deserved it. Before dawn, Ben left with the document case, hidden beneath sacks of oats. Elena dressed Lucy and placed both blue mittens on her hands. Daniel's repaired stitches crossed one palm in an uneven dark line. Sheriff Grant arrived at sunrise with 6 men. Silas Rusk rode behind them. Daniel met the party outside the cattle gate. He had removed his gun belt and left it on the kitchen table. Grant unfolded the arrest warrant. "Daniel Mercer and Hannah Cole, you are charged with destroying Vale property and concealing evidence." Hannah took the paper before he could pull it away. The supporting affidavit had been signed by Rusk's 2 employees at 7:30 the previous morning. "The mill did not begin burning until after 8, she said. Grant's expression hardened. Deputy Orr leaned closer to the page. He had been present when smoke first became visible from town. He knew Hannah was right. "A clerical mistake," Grant said. "Both witnesses swore they saw us start a fire that had not happened yet." "I said it was a mistake." "No," Hannah replied. "It is evidence." Rusk urged his horse forward. "Take the child and end this performance." Grant produced a second order authorizing Lucy's removal. Before he reached the house, another rider appeared on the northern trail. Ben returned carrying a document bearing Justice Hale's seal. The original Vale deed and paid tax receipts had persuaded Hale to forbid any change in Lucy's custody before Friday's hearing. Until then, she would remain at Black Pine under Elena Ortiz's supervision. Rusk read the order and crushed one edge in his fist. Grant could arrest Hannah and Daniel, but he could not take Lucy. Elena brought the girl onto the porch. Lucy ran to Hannah and clung to her coat. "I'll come back," Hannah promised. "People say that when they leave." The words struck where Lucy could not have known to aim. Hannah removed the blue mitten containing the brass key and pressed it into Lucy's hand. "Then keep this for me until I do." Daniel knelt beside the child. "Ben and Elena will stay with you. Juniper will be in the barn. If anyone comes without Justice Hale, you send Ben to town." Lucy looked at him through tears. "Will you come back too?" "Yes." She studied his face, then nodded as though accepting a contract. Grant placed Hannah and Daniel in the back of a barred transport wagon. He took them to Red Hollow, while townspeople watched from the same boardwalks where Hannah had first been called a horse thief. They were locked in separate cells, divided by a stone wall and a narrow passage. Daniel could see Hannah only if both stood near the bars. Late that afternoon, Rusk entered the jail carrying Owen's handwritten note. "You found the county ledger reference," Hannah said. "Grant found it in the copy you foolishly kept." Hannah felt the blood leave her face. Rusk smiled. "Pages 86 through 90 were removed from the courthouse ledger this morning. They are ash now, along with the mill." "You cannot burn every corresponding record," she said. "I don't need to. I only need enough uncertainty for one judge." After he left, Hannah sat on the edge of the cot. mentally reconstructing the accounts. Every public payment should have produced more than one record: a ledger entry, a warrant signed by the commissioner, and a receipt retained by the person paid. Rusk had destroyed the ledger pages. He had not necessarily destroyed the payment warrants. Daniel came to the bars. "You thought of something." The courthouse stores redeemed warrants in yearly bundles. "Where?" "In the records cellar." A key turned at the end of the corridor. Deputy Calvin Orr entered alone. He glanced toward the sheriff's empty office before approaching Hannah's cell. "You were right about the affidavit," he whispered. "Grant made those men sign it the night before the fire. Will you say that before Justice Hale?" Orr looked terrified. Then he placed a small iron key on the floor between the cells. "The record cellar is beneath this building," he said. "And Rusk sent a man down there 10 minutes ago." The iron key lay on the floor between the cells. "It does not open these doors," Deputy Orr whispered. "Only the record cellar." "Then it is useful to the man already down there," Daniel said. Orr swallowed. "I can release one of you and claim I was conducting an interview." "Hannah knows the records," Daniel replied. She looked across the corridor at him. He did not try to stop her or decide in her place. He simply acknowledged that the task belonged to her. Orr unlocked Hannah's cell. The cellar stairs descended behind the sheriff's office. Orr carried a lantern while Hannah followed with the key. From below came the sound of paper being torn. At the bottom, Orr opened an iron door. A man in a Rusk Company coat stood beside a table covered with bundled documents. Hannah recognized the broad shoulders and the smell of kerosene. Through the outside cellar entrance, she could see a horse with a white blaze and an empty nail hole in its left hind hoof. It was the rider from the mill. The man held a lighted match above an open box. "Virgil Kane," Orr said. "Step away from those records." Kane dropped the match. Hannah seized a folded wool fire blanket from the wall and threw it across the box. Smoke rose between them. Orr reached for Kane, but the larger man drove his shoulder into the deputy's chest and escaped through the outside entrance. Orr started after him. "Let him go," Hannah said. "Save the records." Together, they smothered the flames. The edges of several papers had burned, but most remained readable. Kane had opened the bundle marked County Warrants, 1886. Hannah carried it beneath the lantern and began sorting the documents by number. Owen's note had directed them to pages 86 through 90 of the missing ledger. Each ledger entry should correspond to a redeemed payment warrant bearing the same number. She found the sequence within minutes. Warrants 418 through 427 authorized county payments for bridge timber, freight service, and flood repairs. Silas Rusk had supplied every invoice. Sheriff Grant had certified that the work was completed. 4 supposed freight companies shared the same mailing address, Rusk's cattle office. "That proves they invented the companies," Orr said. "It proves more than that." Hannah turned the warrants over. Every payment had been endorsed to the Willow Creek Ditch Company before being cashed. Rusk had billed the county through false businesses, then transferred the money back to himself. One warrant authorized $200 for special security services. The recipient was Elias Grant. Orr stared at his sheriff's signature. "I have guarded his office for 6 years," he said. "You guarded the law," Hannah replied. "He used it as a hiding place." They carried the bundle upstairs. Orr returned Hannah to her cell before Grant came back, but he kept the rescued warrants inside his coat instead of returning them to the cellar. Daniel waited at the bars. "Did you find what you needed?" "We found enough to prove the ledger pages were destroyed deliberately." Orr saw Virgil Kane trying to burn the matching warrants. "And the money?" "Rusk created false companies. Grant certified the work. The payments all returned to Rusk." Daniel's expression softened with something deeper than relief. "You walked into a cellar with a man burning evidence." "I had a deputy and a fire blanket. I once saw Ben chase a bull with a fence post. That did not make it a sensible plan." "It worked." "Yes," Daniel said. "That is the irritating part." Footsteps sounded in the sheriff's office. Silas Rusk entered with Sheriff Grant and Mr. Edwin Price, manager of Red Hollow Bank. Rusk's composure had returned, but ash stained one cuff of his coat. Virgil Kane had reached him. Price carried Daniel's cattle note. "Your loan is not due until March," the banker said, avoiding Daniel's eyes. "However, the contract permits the bank to demand additional security if you are charged with a felony." "I was charged yesterday," Daniel replied. "You acquired this concern quickly." Rusk took the note from the banker. "The bank has transferred your debt to me. $2,800. Hannah gripped the bars. The figure matched the amount Rusk needed to force Black Pine into foreclosure before the reservoir plan became public. Rusk looked from Daniel to Hannah. "This dispute has become unnecessarily expensive. I am prepared to resolve it." He placed 2 documents on the sheriff's desk. The first extended Daniel's loan for 5 years. The second withdrew the arson witness's statements and recommended that Hannah's horse theft charge be reduced to unauthorized use. In exchange, Rusk continued, Miss Cole will surrender Owen Vale's documents. Mercer will withdraw his objection to my guardianship of Lucy, and both of you will leave Red Hollow before Sunday. Hannah looked at Daniel. Black Pine was his land, his livelihood, and the only home he had known since boyhood. Refusing Rusk could cost him all 2,300 acres. "If you accept," she said quietly, "Lucy loses everything." Daniel's eyes remained on Rusk. "And if I refuse? The bank will demand payment tomorrow morning. When you fail, I will take Black Pine before winter ends." Rusk offered him a pen. Daniel did not reach for it. Instead, he looked at Hannah as though the choice involved more than property. "How certain are you about those warrants?" he asked. "Certain enough to stake my freedom on them." Daniel turned back to Rusk. "Then I suppose you came all this way for nothing." Silas Rusk left the jail without the signature he wanted. Before the outer door closed, Daniel heard him tell Edwin Price to begin the seizure at Black Pine. The banker flinched but did not object. Deputy Orr waited until their footsteps faded. Then he removed the rescued county warrants from inside his coat. "I will testify about Virgil Kane," he said, "and about the false affidavit." Sheriff Grant entered before Hannah could answer. His gaze moved from the open cell to the documents in Orr's hands. "What have you done?" "The work you swore to do," Orr replied. Grant reached for the warrants. Orr stepped back and drew his revolver. Not at Grant's chest, but low toward the floor. The distinction was courteous without being especially comforting. The confrontation ended when Justice Hale arrived with Ben Ortiz and 2 armed court officers. Ben had delivered Owen's account book, the deed, tax receipts, and duplicate weight slips before Grant could intercept him. Hale examined the rescued warrants, then the impossible time written on the arson affidavit. "Release the prisoners," he ordered. Grant's face darkened. "They are charged with felonies." On the testimony of 2 men who claimed to witness a future event, until Friday's hearing, Miss Cole and Mr. Mercer will remain under the court's supervision. He turned to Orr. "Keep those warrants in my locked cabinet." Grant removed his badge before Hale could formally demand it. He placed it on the desk with exaggerated care. "You are trusting a horse thief, an accused arsonist, and a frightened deputy over the elected sheriff." "No," Hale said. "I am trusting arithmetic. It has fewer ambitions." Hannah and Daniel left the jail shortly before noon. Their freedom lasted only as far as Black Pine Ranch, where Rusk's men were already driving Daniel's cattle through the southern gate. All 312 head were being taken under the assigned banknote. Daniel stood beside the road while his breeding cows passed in clouds of dust and frozen breath. He had raised some from calves. Others carried bloodlines his father had spent 20 years developing. Silas Rusk waited on horseback near the gate. "The offer remains open," he called. "Sign over Lucy's guardianship claim and surrender Owen Vale's papers. Your cattle will be returned." Hannah looked at Daniel. A single word from him could save the herd, the ranch payroll, and perhaps Black Pine itself. Daniel closed the gate after the final animal passed through. "You heard my answer in town." Rusk's smile vanished. "By spring, you will have nothing." Daniel rested one hand on the gatepost. "Then you will have spent a remarkable amount of money defeating a man with nothing." Rusk wheeled his horse and followed the cattle south. Hannah waited until he was gone. You could lose the ranch. Yes. Because I stole your horse. No. Because Rusk stole from half the county and expected the other half to remain polite. You did not owe Lucy this. Daniel looked toward the house, where Elena stood with the child beside her. A home is not worth much if the owner must hand a frightened girl to the man who wants it. He walked toward the barn before Hannah could respond. That afternoon, they turned the dining room into a courtroom of their own. Hannah covered the table with documents and arranged the evidence in the order she wanted Justice Hale to hear it. First, the original deed and paid tax receipts proved that Lucy legally owned the Vale property. Second, Rusk's reservoir survey established his motive. It showed that he planned to purchase the mill, Black Pine, and 4 neighboring homesteads after making their land financially useless. Third, Owen's account book and the duplicate weight slips proved that Rusk had cheated local ranchers. Fourth, the county warrants traced public money through fictitious companies and back to the Willow Creek Ditch Company. Fifth, the premature arson affidavit and Orr's testimony proved that Grant and Rusk's employees had prepared their accusation before the mill burned. Finally, Daniel and Hannah could identify Virgil Kane as the man who had watched the fire from the ridge. The missing shoe on his white-blazed horse connected him to the tracks found near the mill. It is a chain, Hannah said. No single link proves everything. Together, they explain why Rusk needed the mill destroyed, Lucy removed, and us discredited. Daniel studied the papers. You make wickedness look very orderly. Most profitable wickedness is. A knock sounded at the front door. Red Hollow's blacksmith, Arthur Bell, stood outside holding a horseshoe. Deputy Orr asked whether I remembered Virgil Kane's horse, he said. Kane brought that white-faced gelding to me yesterday afternoon. Wanted a new left hind shoe put on before dark. Arthur placed the discarded shoe on the table. A section of its outer rim had broken away, leaving a distinctive crescent-shaped gap. Daniel had seen the same shape pressed into the snow near Vale Mill. Another link. By evening, 6 ranchers had arrived after Ben showed them copies of the weight slips. Each agreed to testify that Rusk had paid him according to the false figures rather than the true weights recorded by Owen. People who had called Hannah a thief 2 mornings earlier now sat at Daniel's table asking her to calculate how much had been stolen from them. It was not an apology. Frontier towns sometimes approached remorse by the longest available road. But it was a beginning. After the ranchers left, Hannah found Daniel in the barn repairing the gate latch. The empty cattle pen stretched behind him. I can leave after the hearing, she said. If Rusk believes I am gone, he may negotiate the loan. Daniel continued tightening the bolt. Is that what you want? What I want has never been especially relevant. It is here. She looked at him, uncertain what to do with an answer that demanded nothing in return. I want Lucy safe, she said. I want the mill returned to her, and I would like to finish the ranch accounts I was hired to keep. Then stay until they are finished. That could take years. Daniel finally looked up. You negotiated $30 a month. I intend to receive full value. A quiet smile touched her face. Before either could say more, Elena called from the house. They found Lucy standing beside the parlor window, staring at the southern road. Rusk's men were driving the seized cattle toward town. Virgil Kane rode at the rear on his white-blazed horse. Lucy began trembling. That man came to our house after Mama died, she whispered. Hannah knelt beside her. What did he want? My mittens. Every person in the room went still. He searched Mama's room, Lucy continued. Sheriff Grant was with him. Mr. Kane said Papa had hidden the survey key with me. Then he told the sheriff I had heard too much. She pulled the repaired blue mitten from her hand. That is why I ran to the mill when they came back. Hannah drew Lucy against her. The girl she had risked prison to protect was not merely an obstacle between Rusk and the Vale property. Lucy was a witness. Friday arrived cold and clear. The hearing room above the assay office was crowded, long before Justice Hale entered. Ranchers filled the benches. The blacksmith stood near the window. Edwin Price sat behind Silas Rusk, looking as if every coin in the bank had suddenly become too heavy to count. Lucy waited with Elena in the adjoining office, wearing her blue mittens. Hannah stood beside Daniel at the front table. She had traded her smoke-stained dress for Elena's plain brown wool one, but a faint dark mark remained at her cuff. Daniel noticed it and said nothing. He had learned that some scars did not need to be named in order to be understood. Justice Hale began with Lucy's guardianship. Rusk presented his petition first. He described himself as a responsible landowner, a friend of Owen Vale, and the only man prepared to manage the girl's estate. Hannah rose. With the court's permission, I would like to introduce the original Vale deed. She placed it before Hale. Lucy Vale owns the mill property free of delinquent taxes. The paid receipts are attached. Mr. Rusk's petition was submitted after he claimed Emma Vale owed taxes that were already paid. Rusk's attorney objected. Hannah placed Owen's survey map beside the deed. This map shows a proposed reservoir that would cover the Vale property and part of Black Pine Ranch. Mr. Rusk had reason to obtain Lucy's land quickly and cheaply. Guardianship would give him control of the only parcel he had not yet pressured into sale. The room grew quiet. Then Hannah opened Owen's account book. She showed how the duplicate weight slips recorded the true livestock figures, while Rusk's payments to ranchers reflected lower totals. One by one, 6 ranchers confirmed that they had been paid less than the actual weight of their cattle. Deputy Orr testified next. His voice shook at first, but it strengthened when he described the false arson affidavit signed before the mill fire occurred. He identified Virgil Kane as the man attempting to burn the county warrants. Arthur Bell placed Kane's broken horseshoe on the table. Daniel explained the matching track near the mill. Rusk's attorney tried to call it circumstantial. Hannah nodded. It is. That is why there is more. She laid out the county warrants. Each was issued for public work through a different company, but all 4 companies used the same address, Mr. Rusk's cattle office. Each payment was then endorsed to the Willow Creek Ditch Company. Sheriff Grant certified that the work occurred and received a separate payment for special security services. Justice Hale examined the signatures. Rusk leaned toward his attorney and whispered sharply. The attorney's face turned pale. Then Hannah looked toward the side door. Lucy may speak if she wishes, Hale said gently. The child entered with Elena holding one hand. The blue mittens were still on. Rusk rose. She is too young to understand. She is young enough to be protected, Hale replied. That is what this hearing is about. Lucy stood beside Hannah. Mr. Kane came to our house, she said. Her voice was small but clear. He asked for my mittens. Sheriff Grant was with him. Mama said the key was safe because no one looks at a child's hands. She held up the mitten with Daniel's crooked stitches. Then they came back. Hannah helped me hide at the mill. Rusk looked across the room at Kane, who stood near the rear wall. Kane turned toward the door. Daniel moved first. He did not draw a weapon. He stepped into the aisle and blocked Kane's path with the quiet certainty of a ranch gate that had survived every storm sent against it. Court officers took Kane into custody. Rusk's composure finally broke. You think this proves I burned a mill? He snapped. You think a few numbers will take my land? No, Hannah said. They prove the land was never yours to take. Justice Hale ordered Rusk, held pending charges of fraud, conspiracy, attempted destruction of public records, and interference with a lawful investigation. Grant's suspended badge was entered into evidence beside the warrants he had helped falsify. Then Hale ruled on Lucy's guardianship. Miss Cole has acted repeatedly to preserve this child's safety and property, he said. Mrs. Ortiz has provided care. Mr. Mercer has protected the child's rights at considerable personal cost. He looked at Lucy. Who do you wish to live with until a permanent arrangement is made? Lucy looked first at Elena, then Hannah, then Daniel. With all of them, she said. A small, surprised laugh moved through the room. Hale smiled. A sensible answer. He placed Lucy under the joint temporary care of Hannah Cole, Daniel Mercer, and Elena Ortiz, subject to a formal guardianship review in spring. The Vale property would remain in trust until Lucy was old enough to decide its future. The arson and horse theft charges against Hannah were dismissed. Outside, the crowd spilled into the bright winter street. Some people offered awkward apologies. Others merely removed their hats. Hannah accepted neither spectacle nor revenge. The truth had done the work she needed. Daniel stood beside her on the courthouse steps. "You are free," he said. "So are you." "Not entirely. I still owe Rusk $2,800. Hannah looked across the street toward the bank. "Rusk's assets will be frozen. That may take months. And your cattle?" "Already halfway to his south pasture." She studied him for a long moment. "You told me to stay until the ranch accounts were finished." "I did. Then, we have work." For the first time since she had ridden into Red Hollow on a stolen horse, Daniel smiled without restraint. But as they walked toward Black Pine Ranch, smoke rose above the southern ridge. The cattle had been taken. Now someone had set fire to the winter hay. The inquiry lasted through the winter. It did not restore a single field by magic, nor did it return every lost year to the families who had carried their losses in silence. But the sealed ledgers revealed enough. Benedict Shaw had approved forged withdrawals from account 47B for more than a decade. Horace Bell had purchased grain at the false weights, then acquired farms whose owners had been charged interest on money that should have been paid to them as restitution. Edwin Rusk, faced with the accounts and Robbie Kent's testimony, admitted taking the zinc case from the weighhouse on Shaw's instruction. The county magistrates removed Shaw from the bank and charged him with forgery and fraudulent conversion. Bell's disputed securities were placed under review, and the sales connected directly to the false advances were set aside where the law allowed it. Neither man vanished from Marrowbridge without consequence. Shaw's name remained on the brass plate in the restored weighhouse, not as an honored trustee, but as a warning beside the records of what he had done. The bank was ordered to repay the protection reserve from its remaining assets. It was not the 1,927 pounds 8Cs 3D written in the false securities alone. Eleanor's careful reconstruction of the entries, verified against farmers' receipts and parish records, brought the recoverable amount to 2,146 pounds 3Zs 9D. The first payments went to the surviving families harmed by the scheme. Ada received enough to clear the cottage debt left after William's death. Mrs. Weller used her share to buy her bakery ovens outright. Agnes Kent was given back pay and enough money to leave the bank laundry. She began taking work at the inn instead, where no one could threaten her son into silence. Eleanor did not claim a grand share for herself. The magistrates voided the false debt against Thomas Vale's cottage and confirmed that the North Market Weighhouse remained hers under her father's deed. She accepted only the money proven to have been stolen from Thomas's accounts, plus the modest keeper's salary established under the original protection scheme. Then she asked the committee to use the rest as Hargreaves had intended. By April, timber braced the eastern wall. By June, masons rebuilt it with stone taken from the collapsed section and new brick laid where the old material could not be trusted. Eli Weller supervised the repair of the doors and roof trusses, though he still deferred to Eleanor whenever a measure or expense required settling. The old platform was never returned to service exactly as it had been. Eleanor designed a new arrangement around the surviving comparison arm. Every market seller could request a second weighing without charge. The verified weights hung behind glass in full view. Each week, she posted the results on a board outside. Weight received, weight recorded, variance found, correction paid. Some merchants grumbled that such openness slowed trade. Then the farmers began bringing their grain to Marrowbridge from neighboring villages because they knew the figures would be honest. That first harvest season, the weighhouse earned enough in ordinary fees to pay for its coal, repairs, and Eleanor's modest wage. By the next year, it supported a small office where Ada helped sellers read contracts before signing them, while Robbie, taller now, with ink on his fingers instead of fear in his face, copied tickets and learned bookwork from Eleanor. The western chamber became a record room. Thomas's calculations were placed in a locked cabinet beside Hargreaves's surviving papers and the brass correction plate. On the wall above them, Eleanor hung a plain-framed notice. Every measure must be answerable to another. It was not a grand phrase. It was simply true. One evening in late September, Eleanor stood outside as the last carts rolled away from the market square. The weighhouse no longer looked abandoned. Its new roof caught the last gold light. Smoke rose from the small office chimney. Through the open door, she could hear Ada laughing at something Robbie had copied incorrectly. Eli came out carrying a crate of ledgers. "You have a visitor," he said. A man stood near the gate, older than Eleanor remembered, and less certain of himself. He had once laughed when Shaw called the building worthless. Now he removed his hat and looked at the repaired walls. "I was wrong," he said. "About the house. And about you." Eleanor did not make his apology easy for him. She did not tell him it no longer mattered. "It mattered then," she said. "But it need not decide what comes next." He nodded, ashamed enough to understand the difference. After he left, Eleanor went inside and set her father's brass master standard on the testing table. The metal had been cleaned, but not polished beyond recognition. Its scratches remained. So did hers. She placed a small market weight opposite it and watched the needle settle exactly at center. For years, she had believed that being abandoned meant she had been measured and found lacking. But the truth had been simpler and harder. The people who judged her had used a false scale. Now the scale belonged to no one person's power. It belonged to everyone who needed an honest measure. And in the warm, busy rooms of the house her father had saved for her, Eleanor Vale finally understood that she had not inherited a ruin. She had inherited a responsibility and a home.